Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, today we have our next session of History Makers. So inshallah, I'll share with you the interesting story of one of the great personalities in the history of Islam. So inshallah, if you want to grab a chair, if you want to come close, if you want to sit in the back, inshallah, get situated, get comfortable. And inshallah, I have a very good, amazing person to share with you, inshallah. So before we begin, those brothers that are here and sisters that are here, I'm going to tell you the dream that the mother of this person had, and you have to figure out who this person is. Okay, let's see if we can get that. So his mother had a dream in which she saw a star emerging from her womb and landing in Egypt, and then a further light emitting from the star which illuminated the entire city. So she sought interpretation of her dream from one of the people of knowledge at the time, who indicated to her that this was a prediction that she was to bear a child whose knowledge, wisdom, and intellect will light up the world like stars light up the sky at night. So the star came out from her womb and it landed in Egypt. So that means that he is buried in Egypt. Okay? And from there, the light basically emanated all over the world. So that knowledge took seat in Egypt and from there spread all over the world. So who is this great scholar of Islam? Okay, I'll give you another clue. That he was born in 150 after Hijrah, 150 AH. And he was born in Palestine, in Gaza. As Imam al-Shafi'i, yes. This is the great Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah. So, Imam al-Shafi'i is, of course, one of the the founders of the four biggest and the most populous, most followed schools of thought, the madhahib. And these schools of thought, by the way, they're not only four, they are more than four, okay? However, the other madhahib, for one reason or another, sometimes due to politics, a lot of them due to politics, they basically ended up dying. They ended up dying. Sometimes there was a scholar who had his own madhab, but he basically criticized the ruler of the time. So the ruler basically sent his men to go look for him. So this scholar had to go into hiding. And because he was in hiding, he couldn't have any students. Because he couldn't have any students, there was no one to pass his madhab down. So his madhab died out. Okay? But the four big schools, the Hanafi, the Shafi'i, the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, these schools at one point or another were adopted by the governments themselves. And they basically spread it over all the areas under their influence. So today we're going to discuss not necessarily the fiqhi details, but the life story, the biography of Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah. And Imam al-Shafi'i is very, very special between of course, every Imam is special. And if you remember the last episode that we had of History Makers, who remembers what was that about? Who was that about? A month ago, what is that? That's a lot of time. Okay. What is that? It was Imam Malik rahimahullah. Right? It was Imam Malik rahimahullah. Was it a month ago or 2 months ago? I think it might have been. The last episode, it was the last one that we had on this, and then we didn't have one in February for some reason. So Imam al-Shafi'i is actually someone who studied both the madhahib of the two that came before him, so Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik. And then he studied from them, and he was the teacher of Imam Ahmad. Okay? So he is the connection between the the earlier two and the later fourth, and he is the third in the middle. So Imam Shafi'i, he actually, we'll see as to what he did with regards to his contribution in terms of the Sharia, in terms of the fiqh. So he's referred to by some as Shaykh al-Islam, al-Shafi'i, and he is one of the four great Sunni Imams whose legacy on juridical matters and teachings eventually led to the Shafi'i madhab and the school of fiqh. His name is Muhammad ibn Idris, and he is called a Shafi'i because seems that someone in his lineage whose name was a Shafi'i was a famous person, and he would basically take his nisbah from that. Basically, like if you have a famous person, let's say that like you have a Kennedy, right? So the kids in the family, when they go to school, when they meet their friends, they always tell the people that, hey, I'm a relative of that Kennedy. So the people will start calling him, oh, that's the Kennedy kid, right? They start calling him, that's the Kennedy kid. So in the same way, in the past, whenever there would be a famous scholar or a famous warrior or a famous governor, the kids that would be born in his family, they would start to basically take nisbah through them, and they would basically refer to them as, okay, I'm a relative of so-and-so, I'm a relative of so-and-so, and that's how Imam al-Shafi'i became famous as Imam al-Shafi'i, although his actual name is Muhammad ibn Idris, and his kunya is Abu Abdullah. Now, as we mentioned, that he was born in 150 AH, and 150 AH is the same year in which Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah passed away. And the scholars said that Imam Abu Hanifa was such an ocean of knowledge, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not basically let that ocean of knowledge go away, except that a new ocean of knowledge came into the world that same year. So he was by most accounts, he was born in the town of Gaza, which is the same as today, and he died 54 years later. So all of his contribution are only with 54 years that he had, 204 after Hijrah. And by that time, Imam al-Shafi'i had become so well known for his academic excellence and that in acknowledgement of his eminence as a religious scholar, it is reported that the governor of Egypt attended and led his funeral prayers, right? So it would be the equivalent in our time that someone dies and the president would come to his funeral prayer, right? Now, why the governor of Egypt and why not the Khalifa? Because in that time, if you're in Egypt and the Khalifa is in Baghdad, by the time the Khalifa comes, your body is going to rot. Okay, there's no freezer at that time. So the biggest personality that could come is the governor. So the governor came and actually led his funeral prayer. Now, the lineage of Imam al-Shafi'i actually connects with the Prophet ﷺ, and it is Imam Abu Abdullah Muhammad ibn Idris ibn Abbas ibn Uthman ibn Shafi'i ibn Sa'ib ibn Ubaid ibn Abu Yazid ibn Hashim ibn Muttalib ibn Abd Manaf Qurayshi. Okay, so you can see where his lineage meets with the Prophet ﷺ, and his grandfather and great-grandfather were, his great-grandfather and great-grandfather's father were Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ. And their father was someone who fought the Muslims in one of the battles. So his great-grandfather was a companion, and his great-grandfather's father was Sa'ib. What's his name? Where did he go? So his name was Sa'ib ibn Ubaid, and he was captured in one of the battles against the Muslims. And he was in the Battle of Badr, in fact. And in that battle, the Prophet ﷺ, as you know, that said that, okay, anybody who's been captured, if their relatives bring about a ransom, we will free that person. So while he was in captivity, Islam entered his heart. But he did not declare his shahada. And this was a pretty common thing that no one wanted to, if they were people of dignity, they did not want to declare the shahada in captivity, but rather they would wait until they would be freed. and they would be allowed to let go, and they would go outside of the city. So nobody could say, oh, they became Muslim under pressure or under fear. They would go outside the city, they would take a bath, change their clothes, and then come back fresh and say, now I declare my shahada, meaning I'm doing it out of my own free will, and no one forced me, no one scared me, I wasn't afraid of death or anything like that. So, but his father, Imam al-Shafi'i's father, is quoted to have died while Imam al-Shafi'i was very young. He died when Imam al-Shafi'i was very young, and they were in Palestine, so his mother decided to take him at around the age of 2 and took him back to Mecca, where their family, their lineage was from, so that he spent his formative years acquiring religious education in the cities of Mecca and Medina. He grew up amongst the Banu Huzayl tribe in Mecca, who, in common with many Arab tribes of that era, were very well versed in poetry at that time. Okay, this was, remember, even in the time of the Prophet, the Bedouin tribes used to basically really value language, and they used to take a kid outside the city and let them grow up in the desert where the language is pure. Okay, now subhanAllah, in our time, we all need to think about what is the practical implication of that in our time, right? Our kids, as they're growing up in school and going in the school bus and going in, what kind of language are they picking up, right? Brother becomes brah, right? Hey, brah, y'all, and that type of stuff. So one of the things that the Arabs did not want their kids to learn, they did not want their kids to learn slang until they're old enough. They wanted them to learn pure language. So while they were young, they would take them out of the city and make them learn. And there are families I've met that their kids are not allowed to say slang words at home. Okay? They can't refer to somebody as hey. They have to say, excuse me, sir. Right? They have certain rules like that in order to make sure that the kids learn proper language. And later on, when they grow up, they will learn the slang. But if they are limited to not using it right now, later on they can choose to use the slang or not. So, something for all of us as parents to think about as to what kind of language are we exposing our kids to as well. So since he's growing up with this tribe and they are well versed in the art of poetry, so he also becomes an expert in poetry. He becomes an expert in poetry. His early education was marked by poverty. Why? Why was he so poor? Because his father passed away, right? There's no social security. There's no, inheritance was not left behind for him. And his mother basically had to just really, try every which creative way to get him to learn knowledge. Now, what used to happen is that the scholars, when they would teach, they would have some fees. Okay, they would say, okay, you can sit in my halaqah, but these are my fees. Now, people might say, why did they have fees? And I'll tell you that from my personal experience, I have come to realize that if you offer something for free, people don't value it. So even if you don't need the money, it's better to put some sort of a fee on it, where the people understand that, okay, we have put some money into this investment, so we need to make sure that we don't lose our investment. We need to get something in return. So they actually come to class on time, they come to class regularly, and things like that. So whatever the reason was, the scholars, they used to charge a fee. So Imam al-Shafi'i was too poor to be able to afford those fees. So he would simply go and, there's a halaqah sitting, so he would go and sit in the back as just a kid, sitting in the back and listening attentively to the teacher. But because he was so poor, he couldn't afford the fees to be in the halaqah. And he was so poor that he couldn't afford to buy paper. Whatever the paper or the book of that time was, he couldn't afford to do that. So he used to basically write on bones and stones. But even that, of course, how much are you going to write on a stone? How much, it's very tedious to carry. So Imam al-Shafi'i trained himself to learn and memorize, to hear and memorize. And he developed a photographic memory. and he would read something one time and he would completely memorize it. In fact, they say that sometimes he would have to cover, if there were two sides of the book, he would have to cover one side, because otherwise when he would look at it, he would memorize it like this. 2 pages mixed together, right? So cover one page because the page is written like this. Then the next part of the text is like this. So he has to cover this, read it this way. Otherwise they would memorize and it would confuse him. SubhanAllah, such a sharp memory as a result of not having the means of writing down. SubhanAllah. This is one of the blessings of Allah, that if He takes something away from a person, He gives him something else, right? People think that you are poor. You don't have, like somebody says, I'm blind. But the thing is that usually the people who are blind, they have other abilities that sharpen as a result of their brain not using their eyes, right? Remember we talked about Uwais al-Qarni. Uwais al-Qarni, his mother was blind, and one day they didn't have enough money for a lamp, so it was completely blind. It was completely dark, so he couldn't get around, but he noticed that his mother can get around completely fine. She's blind, but she's used to getting around in blind, and he realized that, subhanAllah, it's not only the light of your eyes, but rather it's the light of your heart. It's your abilities that you can, leverage to be able to see. So Imam al-Shafi'i, he became so sharp just listening and memorizing, that some days if the teacher didn't come to class, Imam al-Shafi'i would step in and he would teach the class. He would step in and teach the class. Eventually the teachers noticed that this kid is not just your average kid, and they said, so what if he cannot afford? I want him in my halaqah. Because you know what? Every teacher wants their knowledge and legacy to be passed down, right? So teachers want students. They want dedicated students who can pass down their knowledge. So when they saw that this kid is there, they said, what better student to have than this little student here? So he started to then study formally in those halaqat and started to learn. And as we said, that poetry was such that Imam al-Shafi'i was able to to make poetry, and he actually made a lot of amazing poetry. And poverty did not stop him from acquiring legendary knowledge. Imam al-Shafi'i had not only memorized the entire Quran by the age of 7, he had memorized also history and other sciences that were available to him by the age of 10. And at the age of 15, he was so knowledgeable that the Mufti of Mecca, Muslim ibn Khalid al-Zinji, gave Imam al-Shafi'i, a 15-year-old kid, the authority to give fatwa. Okay, 15-year-old Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i is authorized by the Grand Mufti of the city that if you can't get to me, you can get to this kid and he can give you fatwa. He's authorized to do so. So now Imam al-Shafi'i, after he learned everything he could in Mecca, he learned about Imam Malik, the great Imam who is living in Medina. And he heard that Imam Malik had written this book called the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So he wanted to go and study with him, but he wasn't sure if Imam Malik would accept him as a student. So in 9 days, Imam al-Shafi'i memorized the entire Muwatta. Okay? How thick is Muwatta? It's like a standard thick book, right, of hadith. And Imam al-Shafi'i, he memorized the entire book, and then he went to Imam Malik and he asked him if he could study with him. And he said, well, I'll let you study with me, but I'll have to appoint a student to help you learn the Muwatta. He said, don't worry, I will read it from memory. I have already memorized it. So Imam Malik actually became his teacher, and he spent 9 years in accompanying Imam Malik rahimahullah, right? Which means that he was studying with him day and night. So in the past, the way they used to do it is that when the sheikh wakes up in the morning, he comes out of his house, the students are waiting outside. And the sheikh, when he goes shopping, for groceries. The students are with him, so they're learning from him, and they're talking, academic matters, and they're narrating hadith and whatnot. They have a specific time when they go to the masjid. If the sheikh has to go to a janazah, the students are going with him. If the sheikh has to travel to another town to give a lecture, the students are traveling with him. So basically, 9 years, Imam al-Shafi'i was basically joined together with Imam Malik, except for when Imam Malik has to go home and have private time with his family. It is said that he would recite the Quran every day in prayer. He would recite the Quran, all the Quran, every day in prayer, and twice a day in the month of Ramadan. Now, this is something I tell you that before I used to read these, and I used to feel like these are just somebody made them up. Okay, it's not possible. But then I learned that actually there are people that are still alive that still do this, and it is not something that is done by the calculation of the clock, but it is done by blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants some certain people such barakah in their time that they're able to do it, right? There's a story about a man in Masjid al-Nabawi, Masjid al-Haram in Mecca, who comes every day at a certain time, and between certain times he comes and he prays, and if you watch him, he makes 14 sujood. He makes 14 sujood. How many sujood are there in the Quran? Sujood al-tilawa? 14, right? So he stands and he prays, and you will notice that he will make sujood, 14 of them, because he actually recites the whole Quran. And there are people that have actually seen this man. He comes every day at the same time and does the same thing every day and finishes at the same time, and then he goes home and prays other prayers and whatnot. So Imam al-Shafi'i was also someone who was extremely handsome, and his beard did not exceed the length of his fist, and it was very black. And he wore a ring that had inscribed in it words that Allah suffices Muhammad ibn Idris, that Allah takes care of Muhammad ibn Idris as reliance, meaning that my tawakkul is upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he has this ring that he keeps with him. So anytime, because remember he came from a very, very poor, poverty-stricken background, so he runs into difficulties. So this ring reminds him, don't worry, Allah will take care of you. You are not taking care of yourself. It is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is taking care of you. And he was also known to be very generous, and he was also someone who had a beautiful recitation of the Quran, such that as he was a child in Mecca, the big scholars, when they would gather together, they would invite this young boy, Muhammad ibn Idris, and they would say, come and recite some Quran for us. His voice was so beautiful that the big scholars would specially call for him to come and recite the Quran for him. So his teachers are many, as you can imagine. So basically what used to happen is that you have a regular scholar who has one or two teachers and they study with them. But most of these great breakthrough scholars, they used to have many, many teachers, right? Some of them 70 teachers, some of them 40 teachers, 30 teachers, right? So basically they go to one teacher and they learn everything they can learn from them, then they go to someone else. And of course, as a result of learning from so many different sources, they are then able to come out with ijtihad, which is even outdoing their teachers, right? Like imagine if you're trying to learn biryani, right? So you go to a Pakistani family and you learn biryani from them. Then you go to a Bangladeshi family and you learn biryani from them. And then you go to a Hyderabadi family and you learn biryani from them. And then you go to a South Indian family and you learn biryani from them, right? You learn all these different ways of making biryani. And now you say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take the best of what I have got from all of this, and I'm going to make a biryani which is even better than this, right? So the scholars who went around and they studied from a lot of different teachers, they were able to even improve on the fatwa and the knowledge of their teachers, because they now had more teachers than even their own teacher, right? So they were able to do that. So Imam al-Shafi'i was definitely one of them. And as we said that he studied under Muslim ibn Khalid Zinji, who gave him the permission to be able to give fatwa. and many other names that you probably don't know. Also Imam Malik rahimahullah. And also after he studied with Imam Malik, he went and studied with Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who was one of the two main students of Imam Abu Hanifa. So he learned all of Maliki fiqh, and he learned all of Hanafi fiqh, and then he improved on that, which was the Shafi'i fiqh. Improved on that, which was the Shafi'i fiqh. So Imam Shafi'i's madhab, the Shafi'i madhab, is basically a updated version of the Maliki madhab, right? Because there are some things that Imam Shafi'i experienced that Imam Malik did not experience. So I'll tell you just one quick example of what they did. So Imam Malik had a rule, which was that if he saw the people of Medina upon something, a certain practice, a religious practice, right? Let's say that for just a simple layman's false example, right? Not a real example. Let's say that he saw that all the people of Medina on Thursday, they wear blue, okay? So Imam Malik would say that since all the people of Medina wear blue on Thursday, and since we are so close to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it means that this is from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So he would basically consider that as a source of Sharia, the action of the people of Medina. Okay, so he would say, well, it's Sunnah to wear blue on Thursdays because I've seen the people of Medina doing this. So Imam Malik had the customs of the people of Medina as a source of proof, but Imam Shafi'i had left the customs of the people of Medina, and his ijtihad started through the literal meaning of the verse of the Quran, then hadith, then expanding into the ijma', and then into qiyas. And this is where urf, customs of the people, would be in the Maliki school of thought, but Imam Shafi'i had a different process. So Imam Shafi'i, after studying in Mecca, then studying in Medina, then he starts to make trips to Baghdad. And there whenever he goes there, he starts to teach halaqat over there, and he meets a young student whose name is Ahmad ibn Hanbal. Meets a young student named Ahmad ibn Hanbal, and Imam Ahmad, who became the fourth great Imam, became a student of Imam Shafi'i and learned a lot from him, right? Learned a lot from him. And in fact, Imam Shafi'i, after he spent a number of years going back and forth to Baghdad, he said that I left Baghdad, or I did not leave Baghdad until I realized that Ahmad ibn Hanbal is enough to take care of Baghdad, right? He felt that this student has now come up and is so bright that he can now leave Baghdad in the hands of Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And now Imam Shafi'i went to, where did he go? To Egypt. Okay? Now, a great lesson from Imam Shafi'i is his intellectual humility. And that is that Imam Shafi'i had his ijtihadat on a number of issues, basically what we call his school of thought. Okay? Up until he was in Mecca, Medina, and Baghdad. But after he went to Egypt, he saw that the lifestyle and the urf and the customs of the people of Egypt were completely different. And he realized that his old fatwa do not apply here. So he actually changed the vast majority of his fatwa according to the situation of the people of Egypt. Okay? Now, what does this mean? What this means is that Imam Shafi'i realized that his previous fatwa were not based on full and proper understanding, because he did not know what was going on in Egypt. When he went to Egypt and he saw the situation there, he almost changed all of his madhab, and that's why when you read the books of fiqh, you will read that madhab al-Shafi'i al-Qadim, right? The old Shafi'i madhab and the new Shafi'i madhab, which is when he came to Egypt, he revised many of his fatwa, right? Now, while he's revising, he's basically acknowledging that I made some mistakes, right? But they're not necessarily mistakes, but they are something that teach all of us a lesson about taking fatwa. And that is that it's very, very important for the people that you're taking fatwa from, that they understand your situation, what you are living in and what you're going through. Okay? His fatwa were correct to the best of his knowledge based on when he was in those areas. But when he saw Egypt, now what was different in Egypt? That was not there in Mecca, Medina, and Baghdad. What do you think? What was different? Any hints? Any clues? Any guesses? Food was different. Okay, so that's why he changed his fatwa. Okay, there was no spice in it. Yeah. Customs are different, okay. So, of course, Egypt had a large Christian population, right? So, of course, any interaction that you are interacting with, then the customs that they have from before, when Islam comes there, there's going to be like a mashup, okay? Some things will be wiped out by Islam, but some cultures will remain there, okay? And they might have their own reasoning for that, and they might have a reasonable explanation for that. So, basically you go to every corner of the world, you see a different flavor of Islam in Pakistan. You see a slightly different flavor of Islam in Afghanistan. If you go farther to Iran, you see another different flavor of Islam. You go to Egypt, you see quite a different flavor. You go to southern parts of Africa, you see even different flavors of Islam. You go to far east, like China, Indonesia, Malaysia, you see a different flavor of Islam. The core is the same, but the outer shell seems a little different, right? The clothing, their customs and things like that. So, and there are also other practices that occur. For example, marriages, right? One time we do the nikah the way we do it in Pakistan and whatnot. So one time I was invited to perform the nikah of an Egyptian couple. Okay, so this was my first time ever, and they said, okay, we have this al-Fatiha. And they both have to hold hands, and there's like a cloth that had some stitching and their names and stuff written on it, and they're gonna put that cloth. I'm like, look, you guys do what you do. I don't know any of this, and I don't want to participate because I'm not sure if this is sunnah or bid'ah or anything like that. So you guys do what you're doing, okay? So every culture has its own flavor of doing things, and they have reasoning for it. So Imam Shafi'i, when he went to Egypt, he basically revised almost all of his madhab based on the situation that he saw. So the point we were making is, if you are living in America, when it comes to issues of ibadah, right, your salah doesn't change from Pakistan to United States to even the space, you're going to pray the same prayer, right? You might have some issues where you might need a fatwa on that, but generally speaking, what adhkar you should be reciting in your sujood and things like that. Can you make dua when you're standing or sitting down? That stuff is the same no matter where you go, right? Well, when it comes to clothing, when it comes to dealing with people, your interactions, when it comes to, for example, work interactions, these type of things, they are very, very sophisticated and localized to your situation. So the people that you should be getting your fatwa from in those matters should be people who are well aware of that. They should be well aware of that, right? And I'll give you this example that I always give, which is that if you ask a scholar in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, say, if the CEO of my company is visiting my group in my company, and she puts her hand forward to shake her hand, and she's, there's nothing there, she's an older lady, but she puts her hand forward, can I shake her hand or not, right? And what are the scholars in Saudi and Pakistan are going to say? Astaghfirullah, no way, you should, there's nothing you can, there's no, there's no justification for this, right? But we all know from living in the situation that it is not as simple as that, right? You can't just quote a hadith and say, okay, the problem is solved, because the situation is so tense and so stressed, right? Because if you don't shake hands in some cases, it looks like you're insulting her in front of everybody, maybe on stage or something like that. Of course, we generally tell people that you communicate these type of things in advance. Okay, the people that you're working with, you communicate them in advance that, look, we have no problem, I respect you and everything, but we don't shake hands with the opposite gender. So, but once in a while, maybe the governor is visiting, and this is a lady, and she puts her hand forward, and the cameras are there and everything like that. So it could really go wrong, right? So it takes a little bit more nuance to look into that fatwa and then give you a ruling on that matter. And there are many other issues like that. So in those cases, we say that don't get fatwa from overseas in your things which are specially localized to your situation here. You need to get fatwa from scholars who live here, who understand those things. I'll come back to you in just a sec. And I'll give you one more example of this. If you get a fatwa from someone, and inshallah tomorrow we'll have the zakah workshop after Maghrib, right? How do you give zakah on your 401k? Okay, how do you give zakah on your 401k retirement account? So somebody who doesn't have a 401k retirement account, right? And somebody who doesn't have $500,000 or $2 million in their retirement account, they might say, yeah, you should just give zakah every year, no problem. But the guy who actually may have, and most imams, by the way, don't have 401k accounts. They don't have retirement accounts, right? So they don't understand how difficult it might be for a person who has $500,000 sitting in his retirement account to give zakah on it every year. How much is the zakah on $500,000? 2.5%, so it would be $25,000, right? So who here can, now the person who has $500,000 in his zakah, in his retirement account, he has money there, but he is probably just surviving otherwise in his life, right? And he does not have $25,000 every year to give in zakah. And if he withdraws from the account, he's going to be penalized so much, right? So how do you pay zakah? If you ask someone who has no idea, he says, yeah, just withdraw $25,000 every year and give zakah from that, right? But the thing is, the reality is a lot more complicated. But it's important that the person you're getting fatwa from, they have the knowledge of the Islam, and they also have the knowledge of the situation on what type of difficulty it would put a person through. So yes, go ahead. So like we said, that in the matters of ibadat, okay, in the matters of ibadat, those things, they don't change. In that, you get the fatwa from the most knowledgeable people. If you feel like the people and the scholars in Saudi Arabia or Pakistan, they are more well-versed in that, you get the fatwa from there. But in terms of local situations, it's really important that you get it here. You get it from people here. And when I say like interactions, okay, there's ibadat and there's mu'amalat. Ibadat, they are pretty much the same, okay? We look at, this is how the Prophet prayed, this is how we need to pray. We need to go back as much as possible. When it comes to mu'amalat, in those cases, Islam has given us principles. Islam has given us principles, and we need to localize and apply those principles in our situation, right? I'll give you one more example, that when cigarette was first introduced into the Muslim world, when cigarettes were first introduced into the Muslim world, the scholars were asked that what is the ruling on smoking a cigarette? So this is going back when there was no research, nobody knew that it causes cancer and things like that. So during that time, the most the scholars could come up with was that when you smoke a cigarette, your mouth smells bad. So they made qiyas on eating garlic or raw onion, and they said that this is makruh, just like eating anything that smells bad is makruh. Okay? That's the only information they had at that time. But then 15, 20 years passed, and people who are smoking, they start to develop cancer and whatnot. More research happened. Now, for somebody to still use that old fatwa is completely wrong, because now the cigarette box itself gives you the fatwa. And what does it say? It says that, smoking tobacco may cause harm to your health or something like that. So it causes cancer, right? So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us in the Quran, don't kill yourselves with your own hands. So anything that is proven to be harmful to you is haram and it is not makruh. It is haram and it is not makruh. Anyways, moving back to Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. Imam Shafi'i, he moved back to Mecca as a seasoned scholar in his later years. At a time, it is said that he had nearly 10,000 dinars with him. Basically, he visited Mecca and he had 10,000 dinars with him, which was a huge sum of money at the time. However, on the outskirts of the city, he came across a group of people who were very poor and destitute, which affected him so much that he distributed the entire sum among them, and he gave all of the wealth away to the extent that he had to borrow money from some people that he knew in Mecca to cover his own expenses while he was there. He was very diligent in his ibadat, and okay, I'm going to skip some of this, but basically his piety is best exemplified by one of his famous statements, was quoted by Imam Ghazali, who said that Imam Shafi'i said, I used to take food with satisfaction. I used to not eat food to my fill for the last 16 years. As a full stomach makes the body heavy, makes the heart hard, increases sleep, and renders a man lazy for worship. So the last 16 years of the life of Imam Shafi'i, he did not eat to his fill on purpose. Although, he started out very poor, but he became so famous and so acknowledged that when he would enter a market, hundreds and thousands of people would just follow him like a celebrity, right? And you know that when you are a celebrity, then money comes from all sides, right? And of course, you have to make sure that you're only taking in halal money and not haram money. But Imam Shafi'i basically became very wealthy, but even then he did not eat for the last 16 years to his fill in order to not become lazy in worship. Now Imam Shafi'i, he was also politically persecuted, just like all other four imams and many other great scholars. And the reason is that whenever a great scholar, a very knowledgeable, influential scholar is in an area, that scholar is respected and loved more than the political authorities of that area. And they consider them to be a threat. And they are looking for an opportunity to put this guy in jail or to get them out of here. Okay? You know that even in America, some of the big names that you know in the Muslim world, they cannot come to America. They will not be given a visa because they are too influential, and the government is worried that perhaps they will come here and they will, create a following and start something, so they don't get visas to come to America. So Imam Shafi'i, when he was in Yemen, he was visiting Yemen, he was arrested on the charges of political interference. Okay? Now what happened is that during the time of Imam Shafi'i, who was ruling the Muslim world? Anybody knows? Which dynasty were the rulers? So he was born 150 AH, right? So it would be Abbasids, right? So Abbasids actually came to power claiming that they are going to install someone from the family of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay? This was their way to make the people rebel against the Umayyads, who were being very, very harsh with people. Okay? So they said, okay, we're going to get rid of these guys, support us, and we're going to install someone from the lineage of the Prophet. But what they did is that instead of installing someone from the lineage of the Prophet, they installed someone from the lineage of Abbas radiallahu anh. Right? Now, it's not very far, but children of Abbas are not the children of the Prophet ﷺ. Now, they came to power, and the people started saying, hey, what about the family of the Prophet? We wanted them, right? So now the Abbasids made it illegal for anyone to talk about this subject. Okay, if you praised the family of the Prophet in public and said anything like they should be in charge, you would be whipped, you would be arrested. And they're not Shia, by the way, they are Sunni, but they basically consider them to be a threat. And they say, okay, if anybody talks about this. So it is said that Imam Shafi'i, he was in Yemen, and he had a debate with one of his, somebody who disagreed with him on an issue, so he had a debate with him. So Imam Shafi'i, he was extremely eloquent, extremely knowledgeable, extremely wise. So of course, Imam Shafi'i just routed that guy like there was no tomorrow. Okay, the guy felt embarrassed in public, which was not the intention of Imam Shafi'i, but he felt like he was speechless, he didn't know. So he started to abuse Imam Shafi'i. He started to, that's what happens when you don't have a respectable answer, you start to curse and yell at the guy. So he started to do that. So the news reached the local Amir, and the local Amir punished that guy for being rude to Imam Shafi'i. Okay? Now this person, he was also a scholar in his own right, but of course not as great as Imam Shafi'i. And the ruler punished him by humiliating him publicly, that he had to walk around the city with a tablet, kind of like an apology note that I regret what I did or whatever like that. Now this enraged this is one of the stories that some of the scholars have argued that it may not be true. But basically the people, his followers, they got so upset that their teacher got punished because of Imam Shafi'i. They found him one day after the halaqah, surrounded him and beat him. Okay, they beat him. And another time, the governor of Yemen was basically feeling the threat of the influence of Imam Shafi'i. So he said that Imam Shafi'i is promoting the family of the Prophet. And he arrested him and he sent him to Baghdad under these charges. So he went, and the judge in Baghdad is who? Imam Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani, who is the teacher of Imam Shafi'i. Right? He's the chief judge over there. So he went to the Khalifa, and the Khalifa is Harun al-Rashid. And he said to him that, look, this is my student. I know him very well. And he is not someone who is, a threat to politics. And he did not say anything that he should not have said. So please, my request is that you excuse him from that. So Harun al-Rashid was Harun al-Rashid was a ruler, but he was perhaps one of the good rulers. And he said, okay, you know what? Not only he excused him, he basically released him with honor. Like, we are sorry for what happened to you. Here's some money, and here's a horse, and whatever, to kind of appease him a little bit. So Imam Shafi'i had his own episode with the authorities. Now, Imam Ahmad said of Shafi'i, he said, I never saw anyone adhere more to hadith than Shafi'i. And no one preceded him in writing down the hadith in a book. Imam Ahmad is also claimed to have said that not one of the scholars of hadith touched an inkwell nor a pen except that he owed a huge debt to Shafi'i. Meaning that if you are a scholar and you know anything about hadith, you owe a debt to Imam Shafi'i. And I'll just tell you two interesting stories and then we'll end. So Imam Ahmad, one day when Imam Shafi'i is visiting Baghdad, Imam Ahmad hosts Imam Shafi'i, right? I've shared this story before. He tells his family that, look, my great teacher, the great Imam Shafi'i, is going to come over to our house and spend the night with us. So they prepared the best way that they could, and they are so happy that Imam Shafi'i is coming, and they're looking forward to it. So Imam Shafi'i comes to the house of Imam Ahmad, and when Imam Ahmad puts food in front of him, Imam Shafi'i attacks that food like there is no tomorrow, right? I'm using an expression. He eats like he's the hungriest person on earth, okay? And the family of Imam Ahmad, they're like, are these the manners of the great Imam, right? So they say, okay. The next thing, they say, okay, this is where you can sleep. They give him a place to sleep. And the whole night, when Imam Ahmad and his family woke up to pray Qiyamul Layl, Imam Shafi'i did not show up to pray Qiyamul Layl. Did not pray Qiyamul Layl. And now this is like a second strike that how come this great Imam doesn't pray Qiyamul Layl. And the third thing, that when the time of Fajr came, Imam Shafi'i, he woke up, he got up from his bed, and he went straight for Salah and he did not make wudu. So the family said that, Dad, what kind of teacher this is? You were telling us he's this great Imam, he's so knowledgeable, he has all of this, and he did these three things. So Imam Ahmad went and he spoke to him. He said, Sheikh, I have these three things that I want to ask you about. And my family is saying, what happened? So Imam Shafi'i, he said that when you presented your food to me, I know that there is no one in this entire area whose food is more pure and halal than your food. So I want to fill my body with the purest form of food, which is the food that you are putting in front of me. Because Imam Ahmad, he was so strict. He would not accept a single penny from a person, except that he would do a service for them, and he would say, you can pay me, but I will not accept any money from you. Okay? So he was very, very careful about his wealth. So Imam Shafi'i said, this food is the purest food, and I want to fill my body with this pure food. He said, second thing, that I went to bed and I couldn't sleep all night because I was thinking about a mas'ala, a fiqhi matter. And the whole night I reviewed the entire Quran thinking about this issue, and I found 70 ayat supporting this issue. So the whole night I did not sleep at all. I was actually engaged in ibadah, but of a different type, which is in his mind, he's doing research. Okay? He's going through the entire Quran. And because he didn't sleep all night, did he break his wudu? He did not break his wudu. So he got up to pray Fajr and he prayed with the same wudu that he had at Isha time. So, subhanAllah, this is to show us again that, you might think that somebody is like less than what you had thought of them, but maybe there's a reason that may impress you even more than what you had thought of them. And secondly, and lastly, Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i, they had a number of debates, and a number of them are recorded. So one time they had a debate on the issue of tawakkul. And the issue, the Imam Malik's view was that if you have tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will feed you. Food will come to you. Okay? Food will come to you. And Imam Shafi'i, he said, part of having proper tawakkul in Allah is that you have to go to the food. Okay? You have to work towards getting that food, and Allah will make it easy for you, but you have to do something. So they are having this debate, and they are quoting ayat and whatnot, and the debate kind of pauses, and Imam Shafi'i one day is outside and he sees an old man carrying a sack of dates on his back. Carrying a sack of dates on his back. So Imam Shafi'i, he went to him, he said, "Uncle, let me help you carry this bag of dates." So he said, okay. So he carried that sack of dates on his back all the way from there to the old man's house. When they arrived at home, the old man said, "Thank you so much." And he took out a handful of dates and he said, "This is for you for helping me." So Imam Shafi'i, he took those handful of dates and he went to the house of Imam Malik. He said, "Look, had I not helped this man, would this man have given me these dates?" Right? I had to work to get these dates. So as he's holding the dates like this, Imam Malik, he took some of those dates and he ate them. And he said, "Look, I got these dates without doing anything." So the debate continues between the teacher and the student, and there are many other interesting, but subhanAllah, while they have a disagreement, look at the respect and love for each other, right? It does not detract from each other's position in their mind, but rather they say, okay, this is an academic disagreement. You have a view, I have a view. Maybe there's some benefit in your opinion, there's some benefit in my opinion. And Imam Shafi'i used to say that I believe that I'm right and my opponent is wrong. I believe that I am correct with the possibility of being wrong. Okay, I believe that I'm correct, but there's a chance that I could be wrong, so I should not become arrogant and extreme in my opinion, because there's a chance I could be wrong. and I believe that my opponent is incorrect, with a possibility that he could be correct. So I should not cross any limits in disagreeing with him. Because what if it turns out that he does turn out to be right, and I turn out to be wrong, and now I had crossed so many limits, and I had called him names and labeled him to be a mubtadi' and this and that, and now I realized that he was right all along and I was the one who was wrong. So, of course, we cannot really complete the life of Imam al-Shafi'i in one session, but inshallah that is something that should increase our love for Imam al-Shafi'i and want us to maybe go and study more. Now, Imam al-Shafi'i, he did a great, perhaps one of the greatest thing that he did, is that he wrote the first book on Usul al-Fiqh, which is the code, where they call it the code of scholars, okay? How does a scholar look at the Quran and Hadith and derive rulings? You can't just say, oh, that's what it says, that's what I'm going to do. There are like maybe so many different things you have to look at to make sure that checklist, right? That it's not this and it's not that and it's not this and it's not that. After all of that checks out, then you can say, yes, I can rely on this ruling. So the previous great imams, they gave their fatwa, and their students later on studied the fatwa in retrospect and tried to derive principles that they were using. Okay, what are the common principles? But Imam al-Shafi'i, he was the first in his book Al-Risala, he wrote the principles. He said, these are my principles that I use to derive the rulings. Okay, so the principles came first, and then the fatwa came after. So these are some of the differences in the schools of thought. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the tawfiq to benefit from all the great scholars in the history of Islam. And inshallah, remember that tomorrow we will have our zakah workshop right here after Salat al-Maghrib. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la